So let's have a look at rearranging a formula, or making something else the subject of a formula. So here I have y equals 2x plus 8 all divided by 5. So here we have y as the subject of the formula. The reason it is the subject is it's by itself, it's on one side of the equation, there's nothing else over here, and it is the only y in this whole equation. So if I had a y over here, if I had, let's say, 8y on this side of the equation, if I had y on this side of the equation, then y wouldn't be subject to the formula, because y needs to be by itself on one side of the equation in order to be the subject of the formula. So let's see how we'll go about making x the subject of the formula. So we're rearranging this equation in order to make x the new subject of the formula. This is a typical question you'll see. So remembering, this is kind of the same way that we solve equations. We need to do the same thing to both sides. That's the only way we can manipulate an equation. So I'll do this in a different colour, what we're about to do to both sides. So I want x by itself on one side of the equation. That's how we defined being the subject of a formula. So in order to get rid of all of the extra stuff on the left-hand side, I'm going to need to do the opposite. So here I have divided by 5 on the bottom. And remembering, this is like reverse order BIDMAS. So whatever happens last on this side, I need to do first. So if I was doing this side, so here you see I multiply by 2 first. If I had a number in here for x, I would multiply by 2 first, then I'd add 8, then I'd divide by 5. This time I'm going in the opposite direction, so I need to get rid of this divide by 5 first, and the opposite of dividing by 5 is multiplying by 5. So let's do that to both sides. And that means that the left-hand side becomes 2x plus 8, because the times 5 will cancel out with a divide by 5, but on the right-hand side I'll now have 5 times y. Hopefully that makes sense. I've done the same thing to both sides. So what do we need to do next? Let's get rid of this plus 8, so we take away 8 from both sides. Remembering we're doing the same thing to both sides in order to keep both sides the same, to keep both sides equal. So now I'll have 2x equals 5y. This means 5 times y. Hopefully you know that. So let's take away the 8. Okay, we're nearly there now. So I've got 2 times by x. So the opposite of timesing by 2 is dividing by 2. Let's do that. And now hopefully you can see that I've got to my answer. I've rearranged the equation, so x is now the subject. It's by itself on one side of the equation. Now I'll have 5y minus 8 all over 2. So this is the exact same process as finding the inverse function of something. It's the exact same method of thinking that we use when we solve equations, but instead of solving it, all I've done is I've moved everything so that x is the new subject of the formula. So a typical question would look like this. And there we have it. There's a worked example of rearranging an equation. Let's have a look at another one then. So this equation, straight off the bat, is going to be more complicated because we have an x on the top line of this fraction and an x on the bottom line of this fraction. Well, whenever I see a fraction like this, I want to get rid of the fraction. I want it as just a number. And so the way to do that is to get rid of the bottom half of the fraction, because that is the part we're dividing by. So I want to get that to the top line, where I'm timesing by numbers instead of dividing by numbers. So instead of dividing by 3x, I can times by 3x, remembering that I have to do the same thing to both sides. So on the left, I will now have 2x minus 8. On the right, I will have y times 3x. And another way to write that would be as 3xy. So these terms all times together. Okay, so what do we do now if I want x as the subject of the formula? I need to have 1x on one side of the equation. And the way to do this is to get all of the x's on one side and all of the terms that don't have x on the other side. So let's subtract 3xy to begin with. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving all of the x terms to one side of the equation. So I'm getting rid of this plus 3xy from the right. I'm going to put it on this left-hand side, and the way to do that is to take it away from both sides. So on the left, I'll have 2x minus 3xy minus 8, and 3xy minus 3xy on the right-hand side just leaves me with 0. Okay, so I've still got this minus 8 on this side, and that's not got an x on it, so I want rid of it. So let's plus 8 to both sides. And we should end up with all of our x terms, all of the terms that contain an x, on the left-hand side of my equation, and everything that doesn't have an x on the right-hand side of the equation. Well, what to do next? Let's have a think about this. If I want my x by itself outside of all of these terms, I'm going to have to do something called factorizing, which hopefully you've done before. So let's take an x out here. So I'm going to write factorize left hand side. And we don't need to factorize both sides because factorizing doesn't change anything about this left hand side. So taking an x out of this first term will leave us with 2, and taking an x out of the second term will leave us with 3y. So hopefully you've come across this technique before. If not, I'll try and make another video explaining factorizing. So we're nearly there now, we're almost at the final step. How do I get x by itself now? Well, I'm multiplying by this bracket. So to get rid of the bracket, what I need to do is divide by the bracket. And because I'm dividing by something this time, I'm changing one side. I need to change both sides, so I need to divide the right-hand side as well. And we should end up with x. If I divide this bracket by the same bracket, it's like dividing a number by the same number, and we all know that equals 1, so that just cancels out and leaves me with x. On the right hand side I'll have 8 over this bracket, 2 minus 3y. So there we go, 2 worked examples of how to rearrange formulas and make something else the subject of an equation.